Good morning, everyone. If I didn't get to say hello to you, it's good to see you all. Good to be here with you. If you have your Bibles, please open up to the book of Judges. We'll continue on our study as long as the Lord allows. Hope you all are doing well. But in the book of Judges, we will pick up in chapter 8 in verse 32. But before we go any further, I'd like to ask Brother Keaton, will you lead us in a word of prayer, please? Amen. Thank you. So last week we wrapped up, and as we ended in verse 31, we see Gideon, after being used by the Lord to defeat the Midian army, to deliver Israel out of their grasp, out of their control. Sadly, we see that he is not living as he should after that victory. We ended in verse 29 through 31, where Gideon had 70 sons. He had begotten many wives, which was not what you were supposed to do if you were going to be a king of Israel. We read about that in Deuteronomy. And then lastly, in verse 31, we see that Gideon took another wife from Shechem, a place where there was great idol worship being practiced. I don't believe, if we look in verse 9, that she was a godly woman or came from any kind of godly lineage because of some of her family in Shechem and her involvement that we'll read about today. But he took this woman that seemed to be unequally yoked, and he had a son. And although in verse 23 of chapter 8, he denied the throne because they wanted to make him king. They wanted to start a dynastic or a dynasty line through his bloodline. He denied that, but yet they named their son Amalek, which literally means my father is king. And it's not the first time we're introduced to this name in the Bible. If you want to understand that, look it up yourself. It's not our study, but sadly we will see the wickedness that flows or that follows from this unequally yoked bloodline. And we pick up in verse 32 before we get into chapter 9. But in verse 32 it says, "And Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came to pass, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again and went a-whoring after Baalim, and made Baal-berith or Baal-berith their god. And the children of Israel remembered not the Lord their God, who had delivered them out of the hands of all their enemies on every side. Neither show thy kindness to the house of Jerubbaal," which we know was Gideon's name, but it says, namely Gideon, "according to all the goodness which he had showed unto Israel." So Gideon passes away in verse 30.
Value that means, but it sounds like his life was not taken short or early, but he died in a good old age. And as soon as he does, Israel falls back into false worship. And you see there in the Bible, it says as soon as he died. I don't know if it was, they put him in the sepulcher and then boom, they started going right to false and idol worship. I don't know if it was the next day, if it was a week, but the Bible says as soon. And as Brother Clark mentioned last Saturday in our study of the importance of words and the fact that the Bible is words, that word is translated in here for a reason. It shows as soon as they die. As soon as he passed away, the people went back after Baal. How sad is that? How sad is it to see again them fall into this sin? Again, they fall into this temptation. Again, they fall into these old habits. As soon as their leader died, they fell right back into him. Baal-berith or Baal-berith, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but that literally means Baal of the covenant. Baal was worshipped by many local manifestations, many local areas, and Baal-berith was the patron deity of Shechem. And again, Shechem, we'll talk about even more, but they turn right back and they worship this false god. How sad or ironic is it that Israel turned from their God, who they made a covenant with not to worship any other god, to then worship a false god who named also means covenant. In Joshua 24, verse 25, you will turn back there. We see at the end of Joshua's life, he encourages the people that you cannot serve God if you also serve these false gods. You cannot serve the Lord if you're also having these false gods a part of your life. And he tells them pretty much you've got to do either or. And they make a covenant here. And sadly, they make a covenant at Shechem. Joshua 20, verse 24 says, "And the people said unto Joshua, the Lord our God we will serve, and his voice will we obey." So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and set them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. And now we turn some odd years later, some decades later, and now these people are making a false god that literally they're naming Baal, the covenant, a promise with Baal, their god that they'll worship at the place where they promised God they would obey his voice and not worship any other gods. It's a sad thing to see. It just makes me think, yes, we should be hard on the sin and we should look at it and think we should not do that. It's wrong, but we should be slow to judge because we often do the same thing. We often can fall back into these wicked ways and we make promises. The Bible even warns us not to promise and swear on God. I like the movie Unbroken. The book's even better, but in the movie, I don't know how true it is, but Unbroken's about a World War II bombardier. He's a guy on the bomber pilot that drops the bombs and they crash, and he's in this raft. He's there for weeks, and he promises the Lord, if you deliver me from this, I'll serve you. God says, be careful. Don't make promises like that you can't keep. And don't we all, when we really need something, Lord, if you just do this one thing for me, I promise I'll never fail you again. And we probably fail him that day. Lord, if you just do this one thing for me, I promise I'll never forget you again. I'll never doubt again. And we probably doubt that next day. May this be just another reminder, another teaching point of our lives and to our children, to those we have influence over. We always have to guard our heart. We always have to guard our desires because they're born to go the wrong way. They're naturally going to go against God. And we see here, I don't know if Israel trusted so much in Gideon because he was someone they could see that delivered them, and when he died, they just thought they could do whatever, but this covenant to serve the Lord and to obey is yet where they serve a false god that literally the name means a covenant with Baal. May it be a warning to us. As I read this book of Judges, I just can't see over and over the importance of trying to raise our children to contend in the faith. To contend in the faith even after we're gone. I know Brother Austin has talked many times about, he does, and I as well hope that the Lord has him here, hopefully for the rest of his ministry, but as long as the Lord has him. But even if it isn't, if he is called home, called elsewhere, he's trying to set us up for later. He's trying to set us up if there were to be an after Brother Johnson. And business meetings we vote on and certain things like that, and it should be the same when we think about our children. Yes, I'm taking you to church today. Yes, I'm the one, especially in my case, with a 4, 2, and a month-old, or months old. We are taking them to church. They don't really have an option. But we are hopefully setting the structure in place where they will see that this is something that not only do we have to do, we get to do. This is important to our daily walk, to go to church each time the doors are open, to meet with his people, to listen to his word, to heed to instruction, to open his word together, and that we would follow that. We're hopefully setting up structure for our kids to follow. And again, I don't know, we're not given everyday details of it, but we see as soon as Gideon goes, so does their faith. As soon as Gideon passes away, so does their way of living, their standard. So when our kids are out of our home and on their own, we have to hopefully set things up so they will continue to follow after the faith. Now, again, it has to be personable, right? My faith can't be enough for Jeremiah. My faith can't be enough for Adeline. It's got to be something personal with them. But we should set up the structure, set up the importance, talk about the importance of worshiping God and listening to his commandments when we have them in our house. Because as Brother Austin told me, once kids get to a certain age, your cake's baked. Just kind of have to deal with it. We have only so much time. But it's never too late to start trying to do the right thing. We have to teach our children, the ones that we are around and even here, even if they're not your kids, I pray that you would teach my children the way they ought to go. Because if not, here's a good example of what will happen. You will die, you will be out of their life, they will leave your home, and as soon as that happens, they will start worshiping false gods. Because that's what our flesh is born to do. Our flesh is born to be wicked. They had to have that talk with Jay yesterday. Sadly, as we often do, the children of Israel forgot their Lord. They forgot the one who delivered them over and over, and they went after a God that was the God of the people that had oppressed them. This was the God of the people that had dominion over them for years, and that their God had just defeated, but yet they went back after the God that was defeated by their God. Sin makes no sense at all. Sin makes you dumb. It doesn't make sense why they would leave the God who beat their God to go serve that God. But they did. And if we're really honest, how often do we do? How often do we fear what might be as opposed to trust in what God will do? I don't know about you, but that's something I struggle with every day. God has provided for my needs every day of my life. As you can tell, I haven't missed a meal. But yet I often wonder, Lord, are you sure I'm going to have enough? Or are you sure you're going to get us through? I doubt. Also, we read here that they did not show any kindness to Gideon or Jerubbaal. The word kindness, the Hebrew word here is chesed, C-H-E-S-E-D, often used in a covenantal context, and it suggests that they did not show any kindness. They did not show that covenant, that promise they made to continue on, to serve God, to remember what Gideon had done for them through the Lord. They forgot that covenant. They did not show kindness to his name, to his life that he lived, going and whoring after these other gods. And sadly, we see here in verse 35 that Jerubbaal, that name that Gideon's father gave him, which means Baal contends, is used. Because I believe it's, well, I don't know, that's how the Lord had it, but it just makes sense to me. It's because how the people, God's people that Gideon was over, started acting as soon as he went away. What a sad ending to this chapter, if you ask me. What a stark reminder that it's not okay to contend in the faith for the Lord and to live after his word 95% of the time or 90% of the time or even 99% of the time. It's not okay to give 95% of your life to the Lord and leave 5% for yourself. It needs to be something that we desire to do all the time. God should be the focal point of our life. He should have all of our obedience. He should have all of our service, all of our desire, until he calls us home, but he doesn't. And that's not okay. That's where we fall short. That's our need of a Savior. And it's something I know me and Allie have been trying to do with our children is when Jeremiah makes mistakes and does something wrong, it's like, son, I'm not getting on to you because I think I'm better than you. I'm there with you. And we are showing you every day your dire need of a Savior. Because on your own, this is what you'll do. It is so hard for me every day to wake up and crucify my flesh and follow the Lord, but I'm supposed to do it every day. Romans 12, 1 through 2 doesn't say wake up on the days you feel like it and renew your mind. I don't want this to be the witness of my family, of my life. I don't want this to be the witness of this church because we're a younger generational church. It's a blessing. But I would hate to look back and see when these kids are in the roles we are today and this church goes to kaput or becomes Faith Community Church or just becomes Faith Community Center. And sadly, the bulletin I jokingly gave Brother Austin is real. Because, I jokingly gave Brother Austin a Super Bowl Sunday bulletin. But I remember growing up and how many times churches would cancel services to have a Super Bowl party. And they would do it thinking they were doing okay because they were still gathering together, but that's not the focus of Sunday. That's not okay. I don't want it to be as soon as me or their mom dies that the Hicks family just goes a whoring after other gods. They leave the straight and narrow path and they go for the one that's broad and easy. And guess what? If left on my own, that's what I would do. We ought to teach them their need of the Lord, the desire to walk after him, to obey his voice, to take those promises, those covenants seriously. And how serious is it of that church covenant we're going over? That's something that we promise to each other in front of the Lord to engage in. If I don't teach my kids the world, if I don't teach my kids this word, if I don't live it out in front of them, if it isn't real and personal to me, then this will most likely be the case of my children, unless, again, the Lord has mercy and spares them. Again, that glass house, boy, your kids will humble you, make you in a glass house. They see what happens every day. Makes me think a lot if you turn to Proverbs chapter 4. Just kind of something we went over in our Bible study recently. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 14. Proverbs 4, verse 14 says, "Enter not into the paths of the wicked, and go not in the way of the evil man, or evil men. Avoid it, pass not by it, turn from it, and pass away. For they sleep not, except they have done mischief, and their sleep is taken away, unless they have caused some to fall." Right? You hear the thing, misery loves company? Verse 17, "For they eat the bread of wickedness, and they drink the wine of violence." That is what sustains them, is wickedness, is evil. But, verse 18, "But the path of the just is as a shining light, that shineth more and more into the perfect day. The way of wicked is as darkness, and they know not at what they stumble." It just makes me think of that, because this was supposed to really go more along the lines of when we covered Gideon's life, to where he was someone that doubted God all the time. The Lord used him then, encouraged him, strengthened his faith. He went trusting in the Lord again, took 300 men and defeated 132,000. The Lord used him in a mighty way to deliver them. He even responded when they wanted him to put him on this throne, to act in such a way and of a king and to set this line up. He denied that, and he said, "No, serve the Lord." And then we get to the end of it, and then he starts acting like the world does. He started acting like a worldly king does. And then we see the people start acting like the world does. And it's just so sad. And if we turn away from that wicked way, if we don't even pass by it, don't even look at it, don't even think about it, it can help us avoid the temptations that we all are prone to. Jay likes lighthouses right now. Talked about that the path of the just is like a lighthouse into those lost ships out in the sea. Where do I go? And if we're living our life as we should, and our kids, maybe they get out of our house, maybe they live amuck and they live a fool. And if you're still walking the path of the just, you can be a light. And they can say, "Dad, where do I go?" "Follow this way, son. Not my way, it's God's way." All right, back in our text, Judges chapter 9. I just pray the Lord would use this church to be a beacon in this community as long as he tarries. And that we're not being lazy or content or prideful in the fact that we're a young church and the Lord has grown us, he saved souls, and that we would just rest in that. But that every day we would contend in that faith. As a whole, as individuals, as a family. So the Lord would bless, and this church, again, can be a witness to this community. More people that stumble upon here, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's through marriage, whether it's through whatever it may be. And the Lord could use this as a hospital for sinners to get people's life right. Unto that perfect day. I can't help but think that perfect day has to be the day we wake up in heaven with Jesus. No more sin, no more pain. What a day that'll be. Judges chapter 9. So as we now move to chapter 9, obviously some time has passed from verse 31 when Amalek is born, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. You've got the Dollar General version of Tyler Clark up here, so I apologize for that. But Amalek was not the last son born of Gideon, as we'll see later on. That was Jotham, Jotham, probably not pronouncing that right either. We will be introduced to him later on in this chapter. But I would assume that Amalek is mentioned here due to what transpires in this chapter. He is listed as one of the only sons that we know of by name until this chapter that Gideon had. And sadly, I think we'll see why. And also I wanted to note that talking to some of my brethren who are the Lord has just given wisdom to, I know I've mentioned over and over, and I want to do this more for just anyone listening online. But I believe that the men the 300 men had swords on them when they went to fight. I know I talked over and over, they didn't. I believe they had to, because when they get to these kings and these princes, they slay them, they discomfit them, and you can't really do that with just a ram's horn and a lamp. But I don't believe they had them drawn. I believe when they walked up to those hosts, they literally just had that ram's horn and that lamp, that pitcher. The sword was at their wayside. It wasn't ready to be used, but I believe later on they did. So I just wanted to clear that, because I don't ever want to falsely speak up here, and if I ever do, I want to correct it or be corrected. But in Judges chapter 9, we will pick up here with Amalek and his life, and sadly, the wickedness that follows. Verse 1, and Amalek, the son of Jerubbaal, which again is Gideon, we know, went to Shechem unto his mother's brethren, and communed with them, and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Speak, I pray you, in the ears of all the men of Shechem, whether it is better for you, either that all the sons of Jerubbaal, which are 70 persons, and again, for those maybe who are new, 70, so a score is 20. So 70, 3 times 20 is 60, and then 10 gives us 70. Reign over you, or that one reign over you. So he's saying, is it better for you that 70 of Gideon's sons reign over you, or is it better that just one does? That's what he's asking him. Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's brethren spake of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem all these words. And their hearts inclined to follow Amalek, for they said, He is our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver, so again 70 pieces of silver, out of the house of Baal-berith, wherewith Amalek hired vain and light persons which followed him. I don't even have this written down, but just reading it again, should be another example of people in this life, especially this world. As Brother Austin said, it's very important who we take advice from, but this world will give you advice to follow your heart. That heart will lead you in worse situations than you could ever imagine. And we see when we're at to find one here. Don't follow your heart. Follow God's word. But anyway, we read these first 4 verses here. Amalek goes to Shechem, a land that is rampant with idol worship and corruption, and goes to find his family who lives there, the family of his mother. And again, this is why when we read this, I don't believe that his mother was this godly woman. I believe it was probably an unequally yoked marriage. So we talked about last time that probably wasn't provoked by true godly love, but lust, desire, whatever it may be that he was feeling that day. And he goes here to talk to his mother's brethren, so his uncles, probably his grandson, maybe some of his cousins, but everyone on that Shechem side that's living after Baal. He starts planting his desire, his plan to be king over Israel with his family members there. Although in verse 23 of chapter 8, we see when the men in verse 22 ask him to be the king over them, and that his son might, and that his son's sons might, he wants to start that line, that lineage. Gideon answers correctly. He says, And Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Even though that answer was given, even though Gideon formally declined the role of king in Israel and the setting up of his dynasty line out of his seed, it seems that Amalek had no such feeling. He wants to rule. He wants to be in a power. He wants to be in authority. And we'll read here later on that he will do anything and everything to get to that. He goes over and starts plotting this little seed. Hey, don't you think it'd be better if just one of us, you had entered a one of us, not 70? And if we look at that, that's how often church issues happen. Hey, did you agree with the pastor what he really said? We got to be careful. We're no different. But he starts just planting this little seed, that little gossip, a little rumor trail just going. Hey, I'm not saying anything's going to happen, but what if the 70 were gone and it were just me? Amalek has taken for granted this dynasty line that was proposed by the men of Israel in chapter 8, verse 22, because again, he starts his plan by saying either all of Gideon's sons, his brethren, can rule over you. So even though Gideon said no, he believes that his line, his family will come to power, be in power. So he says, hey, you can either have the 70 over here that, some of them serve that God that they just overthrew and that my dad served, or, it could just be me. Remember, me, I'm one of you all. I'm just like you. Unlike those other guys, those squares, those ones that try to do all that right stuff. I'm just like you. Sadly, doesn't this happen a lot today, whether it's in churches, politics, families, businesses? We see it all the time. The Bible is relevant still today. We see now that Amalek's plan spreads with the help of his mother's family. They go and talk to all the rest of the men of Shechem, letting them know of his plan. Again, probably just passing by, walking, maybe having lunch. Man, we got 70 sons of Gideon coming up. And that's going to be a lot of drama. But we got one guy that's like us. He's from us. He's so-and-so's daughter. Remember him? Good old boy. You ever thought about maybe just having him? Again, that's that vain conversation. And when the Bible talks about vain conversation, it doesn't always mean that it's anti-God. It just means that it's not pleasing God. It's not serving God, which I guess is anti-God, but it's not always just tearing down God, but it's useless, wasteful conversation. They would go and talk to all these men of Shechem, letting them know this plan and gauging the interest, trying to get everyone to agree that's the best interest of letting this one man that's from their family, from their way of living, to rule as opposed to 70 of Gideon's sons. They didn't know Shechem. They didn't know the men of Shechem. They didn't understand them. They didn't sympathize with them. They didn't agree with what they were doing. But this one did. And sadly, it works. Why do I believe it works? Because they listen to their hearts. And the Bible tells us that our heart is wicked above all else, outside of the Lord allowing it to happen. Please don't, I'm not taking away from God's sovereign will, but we see just how the Lord uses characteristics of men to allow things to pass. But sadly it works. It's wicked. That's why I say sadly, but the Lord allowed it. So his plan works, and he has given 70 pieces of silver. And you even see here, Israel's so corrupt at this moment that it's 70 pieces of silver that is pagan money. It's pagan money from the house of Baal-berith. 70 pieces of silver, one for each of Gideon's sons. And with that money, Amalek hired men who are vain and light. I'm trying to look this up. I believe it means men of no real character. Men that are easily swayed to do whatever and whenever and whatever by money. They stand for nothing, but they often think too highly of themselves. He hires these men that probably you wouldn't want to bring home to supper or say you're kinfolk with or a part of, but sometimes you need them to do things you're ashamed of. And what does he hire these men for? Well, we'll see. And again, I just want to point, we see the ugly state that Israel's in at this time. Pagan worship and ideals flowed freely. And it seems that it was used in everyday practice because the exchange of money was, based out of the house of Baal-berith. What is our money founded upon? Besides a printer. What is our money founded upon? It's supposed to be gold. It's supposed to be the resources we have that we can back it up. So that 70 pieces of silver was backed up by Baal-berith. That was their source of revenue. That was their source of security, that they could print this money on and it would mean something. So verses 5 through 6, we see the plan unfold. And he went, he being Amalek, unto his father's house at Ophrah, and slew his brethren, the sons of Jerubbaal, being 70 persons, upon one stone. Notwithstanding yet Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, and all the house of Milo, and went and made Amalek king by the plain of the pillar that was in Shechem. So again, this money and these men who were hired to kill all of Gideon's sons, all of Amalek's brothers. When I read this, I guess just something I just was curious about, I guess just in my mind went to is, I wonder, did Amalek grow up with these guys? Did he grow up with these 70 men? Did he play with them? Did they have fun together? Were they buddies? Did they share meals together? Did they go to school together? Did they make memories together? Were they friends? I can't help it. I think about, I'm sure when you have different moms, it's probably weird, but I think about how I grew up with some of my cousins. And I grew up with Tyler and Nathan, mainly us three. We were closer in age. Think of all the things that we did together, all the fun we had. And that's just 3 of us, let alone 70 men. He had to grow up with them, right? He had to know them a little bit. There's some innocence of being a kid. probably played together, whatever they did, they probably got in trouble together. But then yet there's a switch flipped, and the desire for power and authority can have such a draw on people, and I think particularly men, that they'll do whatever they need to do for it. And we see that Amalek's desire to be king was so strong that he was willing to kill all of his brothers. He was willing to hire men to come and kill all of his family. And really, honestly, you still see it today. Whether it's power, whether it's things you want, things to get out of that you want to deal with. In verse 5 it says, upon one stone, I believe that, because I was just kind of curious about that, kind of caught my eye, but I believe in studying that just basically means that all his brothers were killed in one spot, almost like a sacrifice, almost like some kind of public execution. They were all killed there. At least they probably thought they killed them all, but there was one that got away due to, the Bible says himself here, but I believe it has to be due to the Lord hiding him. And in verse 6, it says, after all the sons, save Jotham, were killed, we see that the men and leaders of Shechem made Amalek their king. The house of Milo, mentioned here, studying that out, Milo, the Hebrew word for Milo means filling. Could be a reference to the leaders of Shechem, the house of filling. But anyway, we see that Amalek was made king by a pillar in Shechem. And I don't know if it is, because I was reading some stuff, and some people say that that word plain could also mean oak. Some people show you that that Hebrew word for plain just means a wide open field that we would think of it today. So I wasn't able to really narrow down. But if we look, it says that it was a pillar that was in Shechem. If we look back in Joshua 24. Joshua 24. We read 24 and 25 earlier. Let's start in 26. So we know that this covenant has been made and that Joshua set an ordinance in Shechem. It says, and Joshua in verse 26 wrote these words in the book of the law of God and took a great stone and set it up there under an oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said unto all the people, behold, this stone shall be a witness unto us, for it hath heard all the words of the Lord which he spake unto us. It shall be therefore a witness unto you, lest you deny your God. So Joshua let the people depart, every man unto his own inheritance. So he sets up this stone. Could it be a pillar? He sets up this monument of some sort. This, oftentimes there was an altar back then, but he set something up for them to remember. Here is where we made the promise to serve the Lord. And anytime we're tempted not to, that we be reminded of this covenant we made here. And in verse 6, it seems that Amalek was made king somewhere near a sepulcher, or somewhere near a pillar in Shechem. I don't know if it's the same exact spot. A lot of people believe it was, or nearby. But again, we talked at the end of verse 4. We see the ugly state Israel is in. There is no fear of God at all. They are willing to make this man king after the death of 70 men, possibly right in the same spot that years ago their grandfathers, their uncles, their brethren made a promise to serve the Lord. What a scary place to be in just a few verses. There's a lot of people out there who try to tell you once you're saved, you'll never sin again. Sadly, we will. We will sin the rest of our life until the Lord calls us home. I understood we would, but there's a song that's kind of homesick for a country I've never been. I never really got that song, but now I get it. Because the last thing I want to do is sin against my Lord. Last thing I want to do is sin against him and disrespect him for everything he's done for me. And I know, sadly, I'm drawn to do it every day. And I can't wait to get to heaven and no longer do it. But these men were doing it, and they were openly mocking God, I believe, willing to king another man right by this sepulcher this pillar that they had put in there decades ago to promise they would serve the Lord. And now they're serving Amalek. May we be careful. Again, right where Israel took an oath to serve God and no other false gods, yet they're raising up a man that has no time for God. We're going to read this parable and then we'll stop here because it's a lot to get into. But I just want to read it for us to think about it, and we'll talk about it when we get back next Sunday, Lord willing. Verse 7, of our text in Judges 9. And when they told it to Jotham, he went and stood in the top of Mount Gerizim and lifted up his voice and cried and said to them, Hearken unto me, you men of Shechem, that God may hearken unto you. The trees went forth on a time to anoint a king over them, and they said unto the olive tree, Reign thou over us. But the olive tree said unto them, Should I leave my fatness wherewith by me they honor God and man, and go to be promoted over the trees? And the tree said unto the fig tree, Come thou and reign over us. But the fig tree said unto them, Should I forsake my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to be promoted over the trees? Then said the trees unto the vine, Come thou and reign over us. And the vine said unto them, Should I leave my wine, which cheereth God and man, and go to be promoted over the trees? Then said all the trees unto the bramble, Come thou and reign over us. Again, the bramble, it's more of a bush. It's a brush that's viney, gets all entangled. It's got thorns in it. There's some pretty flowers, but it's got thorns all over it. It doesn't really provide any shade because the vines are so thin. It doesn't really do any good. At least at this time, they didn't see any good of it. It was more of an issue for farmers or animals would get stuck in it. You know, you got to think sheep's wool getting stuck in these briars all up in it. Then you got to go in there and take them out. This was the least of these trees mentioned here. Now, later on, we learned that I believe this tree helped prevent erosion with the roots down in it, with those land going. But this time, it did nothing good. There was no good of it. Verse 14, Then said all the trees unto the bramble, Come thou and reign over us. And the bramble said unto the trees, If in truth ye anoint me king over you, then come and put your trust in my shadow. And there was not much shadow to speak of. And if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon, which is the forest. The cedars are often depicted as the forest. Now therefore, if you have done truly, so this is that parable he teaches, verses 7 through 15, and now Jotham talks here. Now therefore, if you have done truly and sincerely, in that you have made Amalek king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done unto him according to the deserving of his hands, for my father fought for you, and adventured his life far, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. And ye are risen up against my father's house this day, and have slain his sons 70 persons upon one stone, and have made Amalek the son of his maidservant king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If ye have then dealt truly and sincerely with Jerubbaal, and with his house this day, then rejoice in Amalek, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out of Amalek, and devour the men of Shechem, and the house of Milo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem, and from the house of Milo, and devour Amalek. And Jotham ran away, and fled, and went to Beer, and dwelt there, for fear of Amalek, his brother. Again, we'll close here, but when I was reading this 7 through 15 is a parable that Jotham is teaching these men. But when reading this and studying it out, Matthew Henry puts it, I think, pretty good. According to Matthew Henry, he states, There was no occasion for the trees to choose a king. They are all trees of the Lord, which he has planted. Nor was there any occasion for Israel to set a king over them, for the Lord was their king. Israel is, or this parable is given because, again, we see, I believe it's the olive tree, then the fig tree, then the vine, and then we get to this useless bramble. And that is the one that agrees to be the king. And in essence, Jotham is comparing his brother Amalek to the useless shrub bramble. And as we've said many times, and I think we need to be met many times, we talked about it, I think, at length Wednesday night, praise the Lord, in our business meeting. I'm thankful for what we got to do there. But when someone is promoted to public service as a pastor, public trust for the better of the body, they give up a lot of their privacy. They give up a lot of their security. They give up a lot of their own desires and own ability. And we see that these trees didn't want to do that, right? You mean you want to give up me, with the things I can do, to just serve over the trees? no one really wants to be in public service. It has to be a God-called thing. But in this parable here, we see that Jotham is saying that it was pointless for these trees to cast a king over themselves, just like it's pointless for what you're doing now. And the one you appointed is the bramble. He's useless. He's a nuisance. And there's a curse that comes from Mount Gerizim, where earlier on we saw, and we'll talk about it next week, where many times blessings came. But this place where he had this speech was of historical significance of what had happened there before. But may we ever be watchful of the evil way. May we be mindful to avoid the paths, to not even look at them, to not pass by them. May we be focused on God's path and what he's called for us to do. Brother Derek, will you please dismiss us in a word of prayer, please?